welcome to this final programme in our current series of the Antiques Roadshow. During the last few weeks and months, we've seen many hundreds, indeed thousands of antiques and works of art, inevitably much more than we could possibly show you within the constraints of our normal programmes. So we thought that this week we'd show you some of the unseen highlights of this series, objects that in other circumstances would simply have been the ones that got away. And where better could we possibly come for this special final edition than our location of last week, the magnificent Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire. A gift from Queen Anne to her favourite subject, the Duke of Marlborough. A monument to his victory over the French at the Battle of Blenheim, and an affirmation of the glory of England. Fame blows her trumpet and holds aloft the laurel wreath for the great hero. John Churchill, the first Duke of Marlborough, offers up the plan of the battle to Britannia, who also waits to crown her faithful son. And Hercules and Mars gaze up in attitudes of wonder. But what all that doesn't reflect is the tremendous battle of taste between Sarah, the first Duchess of Marlborough, and the architect of Blenheim, Sir John Vanbrugh. When she first saw all this, Sarah said it was a madness and a folly, to which Vanbrugh protested that it was much more a monument to the Queen's glory than a private habitation for the Duke of Marlborough. Sarah merely said, "I prefer everything to be plain and simple, from a wainscot to a lady's face."
All produce this sort of thing.
And at the Roadshow in Somerset, we found something special, but so plain and simple that it would have been just to Sarah's taste. John Sandon was delighted with a tea and coffee set that was nearly as old as Blenheim itself.
Where's it been all its life?
Well, it's been in a secretary bookcase for the last 100 years, as far as I know, and that came over from Ireland and belonged to my grandmother, and I suspect her mother, but I really don't know the date of it.
Right, looking down through the list, it seems a pretty comprehensive. There are really 17 sources.
Yes.
Oh, flummoxed, really. You've got some wonderful shapes here. The coffee pot, that's really the most important shape in the service. The teapot, which is a lovely, simple, round bullet shape, which really sums up Meissen in the 18th century, which is what we're looking at here.
Oh, it is nice. Oh.
It is Meissen, the real thing, and a great period of about 1745. So, looking through, you've got the milk jug, you've got the bigger bowl, which will be a slop bowl, a waste bowl. You've got a tea canister for the tea. You've got coffee cups, the tall shape of the coffee cups, and you've got 11 of those. No, there's six of those, and 11 of the smaller cups which are for tea.
Yes.
And then you've got the saucers, one for each one. I mean, really quite extraordinary. The quality of painting is stunning. The nice thing about Meissen at this period, they realised their white porcelain would look so good as the background. They're so proud to be making pure white porcelain, the first really fine porcelain in Europe, and set off the flowers so well.
Yes.
These are called Deutsche Blumen, or German flowers, and painted all around the pieces. Often you get little sprigs hiding blemishes, these little flower heads. Sometimes you get insects hiding little blemishes in the making or in the faults. I don't know if any got little spiders or creatures hiding.
I think one or two of them at home have.
The spacing of the design sort of fits the shapes so well. The marks on the bottom, which they will all have clearly, is the cross swords of the Meissen factory. So, had you thought about it as being a very valuable set?
Well, I'd thought about it. I mean, well, vague ideas, but I just don't know.
I'm doing some maths in my head. We're looking at, I mean, a coffee pot like that, one's got to be talking 4 figures for. The cups and saucers, £250. A nice shaped coffee cup, even £350 each. You've got tea canisters, bowls at £500 or £600. So we can easily come to £10,000.
Oh.
So.
Right, thank you very much.
Now, just tell me, do you have a garden full of chairs like this?
Unfortunately, no. We've got some old ones, but not identical to that.
Right. You know what it is, obviously.
Well, we know it's cast iron.
Right.
Yeah.
And, of course, the garden furniture, the garden seat is the most typical example. Where did this one come from?
We bought it in a local auction in the early 60s.
Right.
And we were both working, so we couldn't go to the auction. So my husband left a bit of
£20.
Yes.
on it, and we got it for 14.
Very good.
But that was a lot of money for
It
us.
was a lot of money then. This chair, late 19th century, represents the wonderful stylistic confusion that was dominant in Victorian art. You've got all the classical details on the back, you've got a sort of Gothic seat, all the styles of the Victorians coming together in one piece. But they are typical of a very large domestic industry of the 19th century, which of course is also borne out by this piece. What do you think of this?
I was unsure what to think of it. We bought it as cast iron. I paid £95 for it.
Right.
But with the many signature on,
Yes.
we wondered whether it could possibly be bronze.
Right. I think it's a very nice piece indeed. As you say, J.P. Men, the French animalier bronze artist, working from the 1840s. This is a piece that was reproduced in cast iron, showing that cast iron was a material suitable for artistic productions. Furniture is all very well, but when you come to art and sculpture, cast iron wanted to make the point that it was as good as bronze. In fact, it would have been bronze. Most of these were sold with a bronze finish to make them look like bronze. In a sense, they were an imitation of bronze. I think it's a cracker. So you paid £95 for that. How much did you pay for the chair? You said £14.
£14 the chair.
Well, I think that's probably about £300 now. This, on the other hand, I think is a top piece, and you're certainly looking at £700–800 top market price for an iron casting of this quality. So £95 was a really good buy in this case.
Can we take that to the toys and collectibles table that's over?
It's my autograph book. It started when I was a young teenager.
How young?
I think you might know those four names.
Looks
John,
like-
Paul, George and Ringo.
Yeah, it's got a familiar ring. Were you the little girl in the front screaming or not?
We didn't exactly scream. Nobody in Southport ever screamed when
dear.
they played. And
Jones.
Manfred Mann. That was at the
Brilliant.
Marquee in London as well.
Wonderful. You certainly had an
They used to
exciting
alternate with-
time.
Oh, it was brilliant.
Yeah, my parents would never let me do this, you know. No, never let me out.
So sweet. And she looks as if she's by Chad Valley.
It is, yes. My mum used to work there. That's a photo of her when she worked there.
How interesting. They started business in about 1917, and they were, first of all, well known for their felt dolls, and then they went on to make soft toys. But she's in lovely condition.
Yeah.
The unusual point about her is her blue eyes here, the glass eyes that have been inset. Some of the other Chad Valley dolls just had painted eyes, so this was quite a luxury model. I would have said that she's dating from the mid-1920s. She's beautifully dressed in the original costume, and you've looked after her well.
Yes, I keep her wrapped in tissue.
Very good, because moths this is caviar and champagne to a moth. So you've done very well to keep the moth out of her. And she's still, her face is a little bit grubby, but she does have a very sort of winning expression, doesn't she? I would say we're talking about £300, something in that region.
Gosh!
What lovely things to have. Well, they go awfully well with that, don't they? And what's in the other box? Tell me, what have you brought me?
That's just a brooch that I threw in the last minute.
No, that looks very serious, doesn't it? What did you think that was when you...
Well, I just really wondered what the stones were. I thought they might be sapphires, but they're not anything like the sapphires that I've got in modern jewellery. So I just threw it in as a last minute.
Yeah. No, they're beautifully matched, and there are tiny diamonds in the platinum setting.
They are diamonds, are
Oh,
they?
yes, they are. They're what we call rose diamonds, and they just pick up a little extra light to draw the attention to the colour of the row of sapphires, which are beautifully matched.
Oh.
But there's something much more interesting here, and I just wonder what it says. Oh, it says Cartier London, which is getting even more serious, really, isn't it? It's an endorsement of the quality of the thing, because Cartier only uses the very best stones, and it's a very exciting thing and very serious, and of course really quite valuable. And I suppose you've got to reckon a valuation of somewhere near £6,000 today. Is that a surprise to you?
You're joking.
No, I'm not.
You really are joking.
No, I'm not. Absolutely not. I'm deadly serious. I've never been more serious.
Do you know, I literally just picked that out at the last minute from the drawer.
Yes.
Mum doesn't know that I brought it. I only wanted a value on my autographs.
Yes, could have left the brooch behind.
Have you any idea of the date of the commode?
None at all. 18th century.
18th century, yeah. But I can pin it right down to within a few years, and this is extraordinary and fascinating. It'd really have to peel our eyes open to look at this, but there is just here on the handle a tiny little mark, which I think to the untrained eye would look like just a casting flog or something like that. It is actually the letter C with a crown on it. And it's known as the crown C poinçon, the crown coronet. And it is a tax mark, or levied on anything that had copper in it, from 1741 to 1745. Now, you can hardly see it. It's tiny. And while we've got the drawer out looking at this, I mean, to me, the charm of this, it has to be 18th century. The naivety of the faces here, the rather squashed nose, the sort of free interpretation of the leaves. It's beautiful. I think it's a man and a woman, and these are taken straight from the designs of Jean Bérin, who was designing for the Gobelins workshops, which were built for Louis XIV. They apparently have never been re-lacquered, and you can see the traces of the original gilding. But look at this. When you lift that handle, you see here the shape of the handle with the original colour of the wood underneath. And even a bump there where for years people have been doing that. Let's put it back and have a general look. There's no doubt about, with these Kingwood veneers, it's a completely original French commode of about 1740, 1745. Dare I ask you how much it cost you 20-odd years ago?
I haven't the faintest idea.
You can't remember?
No.
Right. Well, it's a very good commode. And I think that today, I would certainly expect it to be in a shop for around £20,000, something like that.
Indeed, a fine commode like this would look quite at home in a grand house like Blenheim. These are the staterooms at Blenheim, created by the first Duke to rival the grandeur and the splendour of Versailles, palace of Louis XIV. And there sits the Sun King, condemned forever to gaze upon tapestries that reflect his many other defeats. Tapestries, the work of some 200 Flemish weavers, and it took them between 12 and 13 years. But paradoxically, despite the fine tapestries, the paintings, the furniture, the most treasured possession of all is a simple scrap of paper, a scribbled note on the back of a tavern bill. It says, "I have not time to say more, but beg you will give my duty to the Queen and let her know her army has had a glorious victory." It was written by the Duke of Marlborough to his wife Sarah, sitting on his horse on the battlefield of Blenheim, resting the tavern bill on a drum skin. The note concludes, "I can't end my letter without being so vain as to tell my dearest soul that within the memory of man there has been no victory as great as this." This magnificent centerpiece, 51 kilograms of silver, was made by Garrard's the jewelers in 1875 and has sat on this dining table for countless dinners and banquets. It's said that when the 9th Duchess didn't care for a guest, she'd put them on the other side of the centerpiece so she didn't have to look at them.
Wonderful bronze and ivory figure. She's always referred to as the snake dancer, because in this day and age of aerobics and keep fit, she doesn't look at all out of place. What is interesting is the construction of these figures, because they were made on a sort of a mass-produced basis. There'd be somebody doing the right arm and somebody doing the left arm, and somebody would do the head. The actual decoration itself is coal-painted silvering and black enamel. Is there a signature?
Yeah, Professor something or other. I
Oh
don't know.
yes, just there, Professor Pertzel. His figures were made at the Price Kassler foundry in Berlin. It was founded in about 1906, but this figure is very much from the 1920s. From a commercial point of view, has it ever crossed your mind?
No, I just was interested about her, and I just love her to look at. I think she's beautiful.
Well, money doesn't really come into it, but if she was mine and I had to put her on my household insurance contents, then I would have to go home and ring somebody up and say, could you put her down for around about £1,500? So she's, like most bronze and ivory figures, she's quite an expensive girl.
A pot like this, which is immensely heavy, would have to be thrown in many parts. Nobody would be strong enough to bring this up in wet clay. and it would be thrown in bits on a wheel and then stuck together with liquid clay. It's just a single one, not a pair.
No, it's a pair.
It's a pair?
Yeah,
right.
identical pair.
What's the condition of the other one like?
Very much the same as this.
It's, in fact, Japanese, not Chinese. I think it's by a potter called Hichozan Shinpo. Wonderful name. He went in for this very bright tomato red colour. There were other people who did it, but I think he's the most likely. We've got figures on horseback riding through a landscape or a garden. And what have we got on the back?
Flowers.
Flowers, very nicely painted. I mean, the nice thing about this is the quality of it. The painting is really very, very much better than one normally finds. We don't quite know who did it. It was made at several factories. But this is a wonderful, wonderful pot. There's no doubt about that.
I understood they came in on the T-boats into Garston.
Well, what
may
happened?
not be true.
Well, what happened was that in the days of the sailing ships, before we got steam, you had to keep a sailing boat upright, right? Now, if you filled the whole ship with tea, it hadn't got any weight in the bottom, and it just fell over when the wind came along. So they used to load the bottom up with porcelain, which was heavy. If the sea got in, it didn't matter. It wouldn't affect the porcelain. You could go, you know, this could spend a whole voyage under seawater. It didn't do any harm at all. Once tea got salt water on it, it was finished. So you layered the ship. You had this porcelain at the bottom, tea on top of that, and then the most precious commodity of all, the silk, on top of that. And so it was ballast, really. Yeah. So the story could well be true, Handsome pair of vases. They would make somewhere around £6,000 to £8,000. Very nice indeed.
Thank you very much.
Well, as you can see, we've discovered many interesting things during this series of the Roadshow that we haven't been able to show you until now. Blenheim, of course, is a monument to military success on the grand scale, but the house also contains a collection of military adventures in miniature. These solid cast toy soldiers were made by the French firm Lucotte in about 1870. They're some of the regiments that fought the British 100 years after Marlborough's campaigns. Here's Napoleon with his Moorish servants. They were given to the present Duke of Marlborough when he was a boy by a friend of Sir Winston Churchill. Churchill was born at Blenheim, a cousin of the 9th Duke. He used to play with the collection of soldiers at a friend's house, sometimes complaining about the lack of artillery support. In 1935, they were both invited to Blenheim for Christmas, and Churchill suggested to his friend that they should give the collection as a gift to his godson, the present Duke. When we were in Taunton recently, Clive Farraher discovered a collection of Churchilliana, or perhaps I should say, anti-Churchilliana.
You've got a wonderful one here, WC. This is very scatological. WC, Winston Churchill. And as you can see, it was issued by the Germans against Churchill. I think it's rather fun. And this little one here, which is, this is even more perverse. I mean, this is a little flick book the children have even now of Churchill degenerating from a perfectly ordinary man in a bowler hat. As you flick through, he disappears over the horizon and becomes a caveman, which I think is rather hilarious.
I feel like I should be introduced to this character. He's, what's his name?
His name's Gilly.
Gilly. You know, it's a long time since I've been to the seaside and actually found myself facing it. What's he doing with his ears? That's wonderful. You're throwing me here. It's a long time since I've been to the seaside and actually come across a seaside clown. I'd hate to put a price on him because I'm sure he's absolutely priceless.
That's right.
And he's a member of your family. How can you value a member of your family, for goodness sake? Sorry. It's the daftest thing I've seen for ages, actually.
Ian, have a look at that. Well, that's a lovely one. That's a beautiful colour. It's a family one, is it?
Yes, it comes in the family. Well, really, I think since it was made a long time.
Yes, it's George III one, end of the 18th century, and in marvellous condition. We talk about the colour of antique silver, and that has got it, that wonderful grey-blue colour.
Yes.
You'd have to put £2,500 on that for insurance.
Oh, well, yes.
That's
There's a little hole here. Does that mean anything?
That's, a lot of people think that that's for whistling.
That's what they say, yeah.
Yeah, it's not. It's practical silversmithing. What it is that handle is hollow.
I see.
So when they solder it on,
Yes.
if there isn't a hole there, the gases expand, and when the metal's hot and soft, it literally blows the handle out.
Yes.
So that just allows the gases
releases.
to move in and out.
Yes.
So it's a bit of practical silversmithing. Every now and again you find one that freakishly does whistle, but it's one of those lovely things you always hear about a whistling tankard.
Yes.
I mean, I'd love to know the tune they play.
This type of marquetry, then you know marquetry is made up of different sheets of coloured timber, all sandwiched together, then they cut through and one piece drops into another like a jigsaw puzzle. Where in the 17th and 18th century this was done, the saw blades gave just sufficient room for the most tiny particle of glue to creep through, and over the years, as the timber has shrunk, this has created these little lines of almost like piping, miniature piping on a cake, if you like. And you can see that, and that is crystallized glue, which has created this lovely sort of sparkling pattern. Now, you can't fake that. And it didn't happen when you came to the age of machinery, because everything was so much finer. So you have that wonderful element, which means it has to be 18th century. It can't be in the 19th century. It can't be a later produced one. The other thing is that while we copied floral marquetry like this, most of our marquetry panels were not, as this shows, scenes of people in various activities. It was nearly always a symmetrical pattern of flowers, birds, or simply different coloured woods in a parquetry pattern. So this ship is something that you simply wouldn't find on an English marquetry door. And I particularly like the little pewter anchor there. You've got an anchor on both sides. Lovely. And then at the bottom, figures doing all sorts of things. They're loading up and sitting down and bartering with one another. More flowers. And then if we look at the side, with the marquetry, we've got this combination of carving, which, again, denotes superb quality. It's a wonderful thing. But the detail in there, the crispness of that carving, that acanthus leaf, terrific. I mean, really powerful. And you can see it across the room, and it stands out.
It does.
And then you've got rather nice panels on the end. Have you got a chap your end, a fellow, or is
Yes,
it?
I've got a lady and a chap actually.
Oh well, I've just got a girl this end.
But a gentleman at the bottom.
Yes, I've got a chap down here too. I think he's dancing. Yes, he is. A very merry chap. The curious thing about the difference between English furniture and continental furniture is the construction. And the further you get inside a piece of continental furniture, unless it's made for the royal courts, then, generally speaking, the poorer the construction. So, after this glorious outside, this is a little bit plain, and the way some of this veneer is laid is a little bit primitive, perhaps. However, let's have a look at a drawer. Now, now look at that, you see? It's actually been stained a bit. And where you see sort of white wood showing through, this actually is quite cheaply made, isn't it? Extraordinary. But when you turn it up, although the inside looks as if it might have been new, all these grooves here are signs of it running in and out of the carcass, again, which is something which is never faked, at least I don't know one being faked yet, and where these little pegs have been topped with cross-grain pieces to fill in, they've actually gone right through to secure this part to that, little wooden pegs. It simply never happened in the 19th century to that degree of charm, if you like. So you've got absolutely, oh, look here, absolutely no doubt of its age. Look at that lovely thick piece of veneer. Now, in the 19th century, that veneer would have been paper thin. So, all in all, you've got a wonderful example of a German bookcase, a bureau bookcase, or bureau cabinet, that's the correct title, with its original base, that little tiny scrolly foot. What about the bit at the top?
I have got that, but to fit it in our house, unfortunately.
Oh, you had to take it off?
And I'd lived in a house with it in two bits for so long that I was desperate to get it back together again. But it was loose anyway, so...
Sure. Oh, well, a little water-based glue. That's all you should use. Don't use one of the new epoxy resin glues. Use a water-based glue and just restore it to its former glory, and that's all you need to do to it. It has its original patina and surface. It needs no maintenance. It's just a lovely thing, really lovely. Now, do you have it in short?
Well, only with the general house things.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it should be insured for £25,000. All right? Okay.
Cool.
The walls of Blenheim are lined, as you might expect, with portraits of past dukes and duchesses. This one was painted in 1904 by the Society portrait painter John Singer Sargent, and it shows the 9th Duke and his American wife. Her name was Consuelo. She was a Vanderbilt whose family fortune was said at the turn of the century to be $200 million. She was 18, rich and in love with a lawyer. He was older, almost bankrupt, and in love with Blenheim. It was not a marriage made in heaven, but it was certainly a marriage of convenience. She got a great title, he got a great fortune. The Duchess wore a black dress for the portrait, which shows off her elegant neck to great advantage. But the dress itself was actually copied from an earlier portrait by Van Dyck, though you see here it's worn rather higher up the shoulder. The children in the portrait are John, Marquis of Blandford, and his younger brother, Ivor. Consuelo always referred to them as the heir and the spare. The 9th Duke was a great sportsman, and sport in Edwardian times meant the massive slaughter of game. At the Roadshow in the gardens of Luton Hoo, Bill Harriman found something to measure that slaughter.
Now, I've never ever seen one like this before, and it certainly is a very high quality piece that was designed for somebody who did a tremendous amount of driven shooting, because the scales run on each side up to 60, so that's really quite a lot. And these would have been used actually on each particular drive, so that gives you some idea of the sort of the slaughter that the Edwardians went into. Yeah. And this is interesting in that it has different colours of metal for each different species. For instance, here we've got gilding metal, which is a nice coppery colour for hares, partridges, nickel, rabbits in brass, and finally pheasants in blued steel. And in use, all that was done as each particular hit was recorded, then the moody just slid it up there, and it would be then entered into the book at the end of the day. I ask you what you gave for that particular counter?
I think it's about £120.
And how long ago was that?
About 6 years.
Well, I reckon now you could quite happily double that, or perhaps even treble it, because it is so unusual.
Oh, this is wonderful. Oh, my goodness, look at this. Look at this, with this sort of filigree. And they're in very good condition. I mean, a lot of people make the mistake. Oh! Isn't that fantastic? Look, with all the different little birds, health, happiness, peace, prosperity. And then you pull the string to make it go down, do you? Oh, wonderful.
Pretty obviously egg cups, aren't they?
Yes.
Very small egg cups with little tiny, I suppose, bantam eggs or something like that. But what are these little objects?
I've no idea.
What do you do with them?
Well, I put the egg cups on them.
Egg cup, like an egg cup?
Yes.
Stand and then
Yes.
pass them around? Yes. Actually, that's not what they're for. They're actually called, in the old factory pattern books and order books, they're called egg drainers. Some people think they're tea strainers or something for, straining the teeth of them, but actually they're for draining eggs. I'm never quite sure how you actually drained an egg, whether you cooked the egg in this and then you lifted it up, the water drained through, or else if you scooped it out of like making a poached egg and took it out of the boiling water. It's very difficult to put that into boiling water. I know at a lot of talks we've talked about these, and everybody has wondered what on earth you actually do with an egg drainer, but they're called egg drainers in the order books. And interestingly, these are all, which may surprise you, Worcester. They're made somewhere around about the 1795 to 1800 period, so they're about 200 years old, and it's incredible that they've survived. What particularly is nice about them is this decoration.
Yes,
I think it's black with superb gilding. The gilding is absolutely gorgeous. wonderful fine hand gilding all over the place, and they're rather rare. Egg cups now are quite desirable and collectible. A good egg cup from, say, the Worcester factory of that period may absolutely knock you senseless, but it's going to be about £300 to £400 an egg cup. And egg drainers, which are quite rare indeed, I suppose going to be £250 to £300 a piece. So your maths, I hope, are better than mine. I don't know how much value there is on there.
Well, this glorious dining room at Blenheim, which has seen many fine vintages consumed, is the perfect place to toast the winners of this year's competition, which was on the subject of wine-related antiques. But first, a recap. Question 1. What is the correct name for this type of wine cooler? The answer is a cellaret. Question 2. What name is given to this style of wine glass stem? The answer is Silesian. And finally, who was the fantastical Scot who gave his name to this type of wine glass cooler? His name was Monteith. Our winner is the first all-correct entry we picked out of the postbag. So let's just see who that winner is. Well, warm congratulations to you. You will enjoy a weekend for two in Dublin and antiques vouchers to the value of £2,500 to spend on antiques of your choice. Our runners-up will have that same weekend in Dublin and vouchers to the value of £500. So very well done all round. And now, back to our experts.
A smoggy day in London. We've actually forgotten how those millions of coal fires ruined lungs, ruined the atmosphere, but seduced artists.
Yes.
Seduced Monet, in fact. Seduced Monet in 1898 to London to come and paint the atmosphere. But here we have Rose Barton in 1896, who also painted London scenes, a lot of them, because she loved the atmosphere. And how she got the atmosphere of, on the embankment, Hungerford Bridge behind, is that what you said it was?
Yes.
Hungerford Bridge, yes. And this whole wonderful, hazy, bluey, yellowy, dirty atmosphere through which the sun is trying to peer. In fact, Rose Barton, do you know about Rose Barton at all?
Very little. I believe she was the daughter of an Irish vicar.
Irish lawyer. Well, one was a lawyer, maybe the other, maybe her father was a vicar, but certainly an Irish lawyer from Tipperary.
Yes.
But she trained in Belgium under a very good watercolor artist, and then in Paris. So she was beautifully trained.
Yes.
And she spent most of her time painting scenes both in London and in Dublin.
Yes.
Of course, this is good for a commercial market as well, for the present market, because women artists are very much in vogue, and Irish art is very much sought after. Her paintings have made quite a great deal of money. This one I would put in the middle bracket. It's a good size, a beautiful subject, and I would say somewhere in the region to £5,000 to £8,000.
Do you know, I've never seen anything quite so splendid as these are from this particular period. And I would date them by 1860. Did you have any idea of?
Well, I thought they were probably made for the Paris exhibition.
Of 1862?
Yes.
Well, there's something that supports this. You see, they have this wonderful lustrous surface. On the bottom, they bear the mark GB and breveté, which means registered. And that is for Gillet and Briançon, who patented the lustre in 1857. Now, what you do when you come out with a patent in 1857, you seize the best opportunity possible to display your skill at an exhibition, and I think you're right. And I think that these are of international exhibition quality. These may very well have been the ones that were shown there. The quality of the moulding is unusually high for this period. I mean, it's this kind of moulding you look for in the 18th century, and you think, I always think things disappeared by 1860, but it's still there. The drapery is magnificently well handled. And I'm sure they were intended for a great dining table. And in those days, in the large houses, you had what was called a surtout, or a plateau, which was a mirror surrounded by ormolu on which you stood these things, which jacked them up a bit further, and of course the mirror reflected the light of candles and things along the tables. And I'm sure those would have stood on a plateau to make part of a very grandiose table decoration, perhaps with flowers spilling out. I suppose the outcome to the big thing, what the goodness are they worth?
I've never really thought.
See, I've never seen anything like them. If we could establish that they were in the 1862 exhibition, that would have a prodigious effect on their price. But I'm going to value them as if we can't. And on the basis that we can't, I think I would expect them at auction to fetch between £3,000 and £4,000.
Really?
It is a very impressive and strong design, and it is by one of the foremost 20th century designers of silverware, Georg Jensen, who worked in Copenhagen. I think this pattern, which in Denmark is called the King's pattern, but over here we call it the acorn pattern because there might be a confusion with our King's pattern, which is a traditional old pattern. They call it the King's pattern, and it is thought that the design was created about 1935. And it is very sought after, very collected, and one of the most popular patterns. Is this a whole service, or is this all you've got?
Yes, this is a full service for 12 people. 12 people? Yes.
Have you had it for a long time?
About 10 years, but it was given to me by my mother. She had it for any number of years, about 20, 30, probably longer than that.
It is a very exciting service to see on the roadshow, and it is pretty valuable. Today, I think this service would probably sell at auction for £4,000, £5,000, maybe even £6,000. So it's quite a valuable service.
I should have to stop using it every day in that case.
This room in Blenheim is known as the Boule Room, after the finest pieces of furniture in the palace made by the renowned French cabinet maker André Charles Boule. This fine coffer and stand is made of tortoiseshell and brass, and the technique is really quite interesting. A sheet of tortoiseshell is laid on top of a sheet of brass. The two are then glued together, and the pattern is cut through both sheets. They're then separated, and one of the tortoiseshell patterns is fitted into one of the brass patterns. The intriguing thing about this technique is that absolutely nothing was wasted. Pieces of tortoiseshell and brass that were used on that cabinet and stand are used over here on the matching pair, but in the reverse order. Here there is brass and vice versa. It's known as boule and contre-boule.
Well, this particular one here was dug up by my father in the East Riding of Yorkshire, in the course of his work, in fact. He was a bricklayer and latterly a foreman, yes. And was digging the trenches for the foundations of a house, or for drains, I suppose.
And found in the ground.
Yes, yes.
It's obviously a Roman brooch.
Is it? I see.
Romano-British, one calls this, because, you know, made in England or Britain. In the Roman occupation period, probably going to be around about 2nd century AD, something like that. In incredible condition. Has it been restored or cleaned, or is it just as it came out of the ground?
It's pretty much as it came out of the ground. It's just had the mud washed off it, but otherwise it's not been treated at all. In fact, it still works. You know.
Yes, I know the brooch.
You can still put it on your clothes.
This held the clothing together and bolted up on that, which is so practical an object still. Not of very great value. You know, one thinks for something 1,800 years old being terribly great value. The ones I used to dig up in my garden, it was a Roman occupation level where I lived in Worcester. Yeah. I used to find lots of these things. You know, the value is only going to be around about, I don't know, 30, 40 pounds, which is ridiculously little for something that age. But,
especially when it works.
But they're not uncommon objects.
Have you any idea what this is?
None at all, no.
None at all?
None at all.
How long have you had it?
We've had it for probably 3 or 4 years. We inherited it from an aunt, whose father was an oriental silk merchant about the turn of the century.
Really? Oh, fascinating. This one is in fact Japanese. And it's a little series of boxes called an in-row. And of course, as you surely know, it breaks into various pieces, and the cord keeps it together. The Japanese had no pockets because they wore kimono.
Right.
So they needed something in which to keep little spices and medicines and so on. And this is what they kept it in. This was one at the waistband, and that tucked up underneath the belt like that.
Oh, yeah.
And that hung like that. And this, of course, stopped the whole lot falling to the floor.
Yes.
This is the in-row. This is called the ojime, and this was used to keep the cord taut like that.
Keep the top on.
And this piece is, do you know what this is called?
No.
Netsuke.
Netsuke.
Yeah. This is a particularly good example. It's decorated with a black lacquer ground, very fine quality work. These tiny flecks here are actually gold, little square pieces of gold foil put in to the lacquer. The lacquer was built up over months, and there may be something like 50, 60 layers of lacquer to build up that design. This is called nishiji work. The ducks on here are mandarin ducks, and they're symbols of marital fidelity because they stay together for life. The ojime, when we get to values, that's worth about 60 to 80 pounds. The Netsuke, because it's a really rather nice one, it's a lovely idea to have a whole family of frogs. That dates from the middle of the last century, as in fact does the whole assemblage, and that's going to be worth somewhere around 500 to 800 pounds. And this is going to be worth somewhere around 2,000 to 3,000.
Wow.
Surprised?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, you know, it's just not the sort of thing you think about.
Absolutely not. You're now going to have to think about insurance.
Well, I very much hope that you've enjoyed the opportunity to see moments from the Antiques Roadshow that we otherwise might have missed. This is the last programme in our current series, but we are already out and about looking at other towns and cities throughout the United Kingdom to which we might take the Antiques Roadshow. And who knows, we might find other grand settings like this one. But before then, there'll be a new series of The Great Antiques Hunt on your screens later this year. In the meantime, I'd just like to express sincere thanks to all of you who've come along to our Antiques Roadshows. You know, it's been your company, the things you've brought with you, and the stories behind them that have helped to make our programmes such a success. We very much hope you'll join us on the air in the not-too-distant future. So until then, from all of us at Blenheim in Oxfordshire, goodbye.
The Antiques Roadshow regrets, but it cannot give valuations by post.